Well, it didn't take long for the GM meetings to produce the biggest piece of Cardinals news from the offseason so far. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you here. It is Wednesday afternoon, November 6th, 2024, and we've got a doozy for you to talk about today. According to Jesse Rogers, is who I first saw tweeted out, and this is fresh. This is just about 20 minutes ago as I'm recording this. Here's a tweet from Jesse Rogers. I'll just read it to you as it pertains to Cardinals. I was going to say catcher Willson Contreras, but apparently that's no longer the way you would describe him. NLGMs are meeting the media. One thing to address with Cardinals brass, Willson Contreras is moving to first base. Thought that was a little bit of a curious way to phrase that from Jesse Rogers, because I'm not sure, okay, is that the GM, which is Mo at this point, he's the Pobo and the GM for this last season. Has he said this publicly, or was this a report? I assume maybe Jesse was reporting this. And I am just reacting to this as it comes out. There hasn't been anything from the Cardinals that I've seen said publicly. I am not covering the GM meetings. I believe they're down in San Antonio with the winter meetings about a month from now in Arlington, Texas. So anything that comes out from these GM meetings, we will certainly talk about, but we'll be crediting the reporters who are sharing the information and the intel, because I am not down there. But just reading the tea leaves on this, I know Jesse Rogers has background covering the Chicago Cubs for a number of years. And so if this is information that Willson Contreras already has, it's possible that that's Jesse Rogers getting the scoop and understanding that this has already been determined, even if it has not been discussed publicly. So the way he said that was, hey, something that they might want to talk about. Willson Contreras is moving to first base. He kind of drops that bomb on everyone at 2:56 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon. And as I sit here recording, because I've got my radio show at 4, I just wanted to jot down verbally some quick thoughts before my show so that you guys could react with me to the news, which is that apparently the Cardinals are moving Willson Contreras to first base. And seeing Buster Olney now, just looking for a little bit of reaction to what folks are saying about this. It feels like it's going to be pretty definitive that folks are going to bag on the Cardinals for this contract with Willson Contreras. Here's how Olney phrased it. With Willson Contreras moving to first base, let the record show that the Cardinals spent $87.5 million in a 5-year deal for him, and in his first 2 years, St. Louis bought into his defense exactly 0 months. A monster mistake for a team restrained in its spending. Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really mince any words necessarily on how at least one national writer is viewing this situation. And it's been a weird saga since the beginning, behind the scenes, as to you feel like you're not always getting the full story publicly, if I can be honest, about the Cardinals and the combination with Willson Contreras, and he gets thrown under the bus last year at the beginning of it. Whose fault was it? Was it Wilson's? Was it the pitching staff? Was it the Cardinals for not fully acknowledging what that transition post-Yachty was going to look like to whoever they ended up bringing in as the catcher? Just a lot of weirdness, and for a player that I think it's fair to say in his time with Chicago was considered relatively polarizing, just because, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, and I don't mean polarizing in a bad way toward Wilson. I just think that the reputation that he carried with him, it was more about everybody around him having an opinion on what Willson Contreras was. And then you get to hear that the Cubs, they didn't really see him as a viable catcher, and they, were not so sad to maybe see him go. And like, this is the narrative surrounding this player. And then you have, we're going to move him to the outfield. And that lasted like a day. Cardinals couldn't get their messaging straight. They said, no, he's going to DH for a little bit, with the thought being he's going to return to duties behind the plate. We just don't know when. Okay, that's 2023. He ends up a couple of weeks later returning to the catcher role, has a really good season offensively. And it is what it is defensively. Like, behind the scenes, whoever had their thoughts about Willson Contreras, maybe it was the guys that left at the trade deadline where you go, okay, Jack Flaherty's gone, Jordan Montgomery's gone. They made it a problem, but it's not a problem anymore. And then the Cardinals reinstill in Willson Contreras their faith in him in the offseason, saying, no, we're not going to move him from catcher. We're going to allow him the offseason to make these improvements that we would like to see from him. Then he goes and does it, right? Like, Willson Contreras has the great framing numbers and improves in his receiving in 2024, but he suffers the ridiculous injury JD Martinez hits him with a bat. Everybody has an opinion on, oh, he was too close to the plate. Oh, this. It's just like, I feel like the old leave Brittany alone, but just transfer it to Willson Contreras because everybody has an opinion on this guy. And at the end of the day, the dude just mashes is the reality. And so I don't know if I totally agree with that characterization from Buster Olney to just basically from the hip say instant reaction, bad contract for the Cardinals. I think what you're going to hear from the Cardinals, and again, by the time this podcast is released, you might have already gotten the quotes. Somebody down there at the GM meetings might have gotten Mo's ear and said, hey, what's the deal with this? Can you explain this report? And Mo is going to have the opportunity to talk about what the Cardinals are thinking and what they're looking at with this situation. But right now, you know that what I'm giving you is just my honest reaction, my instant opinion, without whatever the Cardinals are going to do to explain it. My prediction is that they're going to look at it and say, we like Pedro Pages. Guy's a really good defender. He's come around a little bit with the bat compared to maybe what we thought he would do. We think there could be more in there. He was a good timely hitter, good clutch hitter. Kind of reminds you of early days Yachty in that regard. I'm not talking about he's the same guy behind the plate, but there are skills there from Pedro Pages, and I know that last year a lot of Cardinals fans got down on him because they would have rather seen more of Ivan Herrera, because Herrera's known to have the more prolific bat. He is a difference-making player potentially in the lineup, and it felt like he was banished to AAA for part of the year because of his deficiencies defensively, which was an area that Herrera had made improvements in, but the one example of him not really being up to par was throwing out base runners in the run game, base stealers. He was abysmal at it last year. But then as the season went along and Cardinals fans were seeing Pages back there, he also wasn't really throwing out many base runners. And when Contreras was active and healthy, he did not have maybe as much success throwing out base runners. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. But it was more a product, I felt, of the Cardinals pitching staff and organizational philosophy that had gone by the wayside, where they used to be really ahead of the curve in this area, holding runners, quick to the plate. That was an emphasis area. And then it had just gotten sloppy as an organization in recent years, and especially last year, 2024. We just saw it, and it just wasn't good. It didn't look right. So I wasn't necessarily inclined to blame Pages for those failures, but in fairness, I was blaming Herrera for them at the beginning of the season, and when the Cardinals sent him to AAA to work on it, I said that's probably the right move. All that being said, Herrera has a legit major league bat, and the Cardinals certainly needed more of that from the right side last season. And for a while, it just seemed a little bit strange that they weren't putting two and two together and just figuring it out organizationally when it comes to catching depth of whatever they needed it to be at AAA to bring Herrera up, even if he was just going to be a DH or a bench bat. If they didn't trust him behind the plate at that point in time, it felt like his bat could help him. And ultimately, he finished the season with a .301 batting average in 259 big league appearances. So right off the bat, you know he's a hitter. Gets on base because he draws a good amount of walks, 372 on base, slugging .428. He had an 800 OPS in the big leagues last year for the Cardinals. 761 in 2023. So he is clearly a guy that's got to be in the lineup on a regular basis in 2025 when you're talking about having a season where you're not necessarily focused, number one, on winning it all and being a top contender in terms of using payroll and flexing muscle to be able to field the best possible roster. You've got a guy that can 800 OPS for a season in MLB, and he's on your team now and making near the minimum salary. Why wouldn't you have that be one of the pieces you build around? It just makes sense. So what I see for this is Cardinals like Pages. I do believe they like Herrera. I definitely believe they like his bat. And in a year where they're looking to trim payroll, to be able to plug an 800 potential OPS into their daily lineup without having to pay, because you're talking about payroll and salaries needing to be reduced. Herrera is an obvious player that you build around. You don't trade him. You don't stash him in AAA. It's put up or shut up time, like he needs to play. Okay, well, how do you do that if you do like Pedro Pages and you've got Willson Contreras, who you signed to an expensive contract? Somebody's got to make a move. And Pages is not going to be the one to make a move, because the whole point of Pedro Pages, in large part, his value comes from what he does behind the plate. So he's going to catch a decent number of games. That would be ideal. Doesn't have to be the everyday starter. You probably wouldn't want him to be, because from a bat perspective, he's a little bit going to lag behind. But generally, I think he's the perfect reserve catcher, second catcher to be able to start 50, 60 games a year. You don't have lead catchers anymore. This is not Yadier Molina's day. You don't necessarily see guys start 150 games, 140 games. Even Yadi didn't really do that. Would have different injuries and such. But you don't have an everyday catcher. You got to split it up a little bit. You play matchups. Most teams do it. The Cardinals are going to be no different. And we're no different last year. But when you've got Willson Contreras and you've got him for 3 more years on this contract, it feels like he's the guy that's the easiest to move. But that is probably the way the Cardinals would view it, regardless of the weirdness that has transpired over the past couple of years with this player. That's the part of it that, again, the Cardinals just cannot get out of their own way, because I can simultaneously understand where, if you like Herrera and you like Pages, Herrera's the younger player, that if he can have the offseason that, say, Contreras did a year ago, where he really improved his work behind the plate, and whatever that looked like in all the areas the Cardinals wanted to see it from him, I believe they did. They saw that improvement. He put the work in, and he got the results. If Herrera can do that this offseason, because I think normally he's focused more on the bat, he loves to hit. They've talked about he's a hitter, and that's maybe how he has typically spent the most of his time when he's practicing and trying to improve his skills. Might have to have the offseason where he puts in that same level of discipline and work behind the plate to turn into a guy that they can trust at a big league level, and to have him back there regularly to command the pitching staff. If he does that, suddenly you're talking about a very valuable commodity, a young player who is cost-controlled, who can have an 800 OPS. He can have a Willson Contreras level bat. Maybe that's the upside. That's an upside that he can reach offensively, but he can do it as a catcher behind the plate that's not making $18.5 million per season like Willson Contreras is. The Cardinals could trade Contreras, and I'm going to be interested to hear from Willson. That maybe the first time we get to publicly is going to be winter warm-up. Maybe he'll talk to a reporter or something before then and want to tell his side of what's going on. Remains to be seen. But I'm going to be curious to hear from him. I said $18.5 million. He's making 18 last year, making 18 this coming year, 18 in 2026, and 18.5 in 2027. And then there will be a team option for $17.5 million in 2028, which extends it to I guess that would be a 6-year contract. The buyout on that is $5 million. So that's a healthy buyout. If they don't think Willson Contreras can provide $12 million of value in 2028, they still got to pay him the $5 million buyout at that point. But the calculus on this is going to be completely different if he's a first baseman instead. And I started by talking about, I don't really agree with the assessment from Buster Olney. I agree with part of it. The part that says the Cardinals didn't buy into his defense at all, I think is where the Cardinals end up with some egg on their face for sure. That's exactly what happened in 2023. They were listening to people in that clubhouse that arguably they should not have. They should have been willing to trust the new guy, and they didn't. I think the pitchers were up in arms. And look, I'm not going to say that Contreras was perfect, because I don't think we'll really ever know everything that folks had an issue with at that point in time. It was reported by Michael Kay, right, the Yankees announcer, that there were pitches that he was calling on PitchCom that guys didn't throw. I think that the fact that something like that happens and you can't find a way to communicate with one another, and you have to run to the, wherever the pitchers, if they told Mo or they told Ollie or whatever the case was, I think that, is showing bad leadership on the part of those pitchers that may have participated in that. But if it was anything else that was going on, we don't know. I still don't feel as though I have seen it reported definitively, and I am not aware of anything behind the scenes that's definitive on exactly everything that might have gone down. But certainly there was unrest surrounding the situation in 2023. But then to say that the Cardinals didn't buy into his defense this past year, I don't think is fair, because, first of all, Buster Olney doesn't cover the Cardinals day to day, so he might not have an awareness, boots on the ground, of exactly what the Cardinals were saying about it. But I think they praised universally the work that Willson put in. And that's why this narrative is going to be a little bit gnarly to have to stomach if you're the Cardinals, because it may well be that if you had a conversation with Willson Contreras, and look, that conversation first and foremost had to be, hey, we're talking about trim and payroll. You had a comment at the end of the season saying basically, we've got holes in the lineup 1 through 9. It's going to be up to the front office to fix it. Willson, respectfully, we're not going to fix it. We're going to get worse. Maybe not worse, but we're going to spend less money trying to get better. which is, usually the outcome is you're not as good because you're not devoting the resources toward it. So if there's angst from Willson Contreras on that front, it wouldn't be a surprise because it's already something that he's talked about. He spoke publicly about it, and then came the hammer that, the Cardinals are going to drop payroll, and they're going to look at a more of a long-range view than we have to win in 2025. So that conversation had to be one that Mozeliak and Willson Contreras have had by now. If they didn't, Mozeliak is not doing his job. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that it's happened. But the other angle to that conversation is, oh, by the way, you're playing first base. And again, that's if you stay, right? So it's very interesting because you can make the case that the Cardinals have, by their decision-making around Contreras last year when it came to not trusting him behind the plate to get through some struggles, to handle that situation publicly about as poorly as an organization possibly could. From top to bottom, they handled it badly. It is what it is. We've been over it. But then, honestly, to turn the corner and to instill that faith and confidence in Contreras the way an organization ought to do, I think the Cardinals did a much better job. It was night and day in 2024 with how they handled Contreras. And yet, for those that just remember what happened in 2023, like Buster Olney perhaps, the narrative is going to be overwhelming that, the Cardinals just never believed in Contreras defensively. I'm telling you what's going to come from Mozeliak when he gets a chance to talk about it, if it hasn't happened already by the time you're listening, is probably this explanation of, well, you've got an MVP leaving the first base role who is making $25 million, Paul Goldschmidt, and we're under payroll constraints. So to say that we've got three catchers that we like, and this is the best way to maybe get all of them involved on a regular basis during the season is probably the best way to accurately describe what's going on here. Now, it's a lot of trust you're instilling in Ivan Herrera to be reliable, and it'll be interesting to see. Another follow-up question is going to be, Mo, is it that he's going to play first base, or is he going to be exclusively first base? You're not going to even use Contreras as an option behind the plate anymore because it's not going to be something they're asking him to work on anymore. And if that's the case, then that's the case. But I'll be curious, and I'll be curious how Contreras takes that. A lot of him coming to the Cardinals, remember, was he wanted to fill the shoes. He wanted to follow in Yadi's footsteps. He respected, appreciated Yadi. I think his pitchers this past year really appreciated the work that Willson put into those relationships and to try to be the best catcher he could be. And I honestly think he did a pretty good job. So unless we're getting bluster and behind the scenes, there was more to it last year, this past year in 24, where Contreras wasn't up to par, which is not my read of the situation as I sit here talking into this microphone. It's not how I see it. I think Willson did a really fine job this past summer and is to be commended and respected for how he performed and the work that he put in behind the plate. It's meaningful to him. So it's very difficult to kind of square the circle as we look at the facts here, which are the Cardinals are going to reduce payroll. Willson Contreras said, hey, the front office needs to go out and spend more to improve our lineup so we can make the playoffs like they told me we would when I got here. So that would be okay. If not disgruntled, he's going to be a little disappointed, for sure, at the state of things. But if he doesn't demand a trade because he's not that kind of player, he wants to be able to try and see through what he started here in St. Louis, which is where he wanted to end up in the first place, then maybe he doesn't ask for that trade. But then he gets the bombshell that, oh, we're moving you to first base. Well, how's he going to react to that? I wouldn't blame him if he was pissed. It's going to feel like a bait and switch. And if you're the Cardinals, you're going to be fighting that narrative, that national narrative around the game, that everybody looks at this news story popping up and says, what is going on in St. Louis? What are the Cardinals doing with Willson Contreras? It's exactly the sentiment that Buster Olney shared. Right? So how is Willson going to feel about this? I'm still recording, and right here live, Derek Gould, who covers the Cardinals for the Post-Dispatch, of course, is down there at the GM meetings, and he's got this quote from John Mozeliak on the topic. John Mozeliak on Willson Contreras moving to first base /DH. It's part of him wanting to stay with the Cardinals. It's also an idea about keeping him healthy. It is, quote, unlikely he will catch much. So that's about what I kind of thought, is that they're going to almost have him not really focus at all on catching anymore. He's going to be a DH. He's going to be a first baseman. What's the defense at first base going to really look like in a full-time capacity? Fantastic question. It is going to give Ollie Marmol flexibility, though. Like, after we get over this initial shock, and again, the narrative stuff is what really compels me and fascinates me. because if I've explained this well enough, hopefully, and let me know in the comments your guys' thoughts. Of course, I want to know what you guys think. For Contreras to be a catcher and have pride and take value and find meaning in that, that's part of his identity. He wants to stay with the Cardinals, is the way that it's being described here by DG, according to Mo. And faced with this decision of, hey, we're going to be kind of trimming back payroll. You've got your contract. We could try to trade you. We're not going to just want to give you away, though. And that's a thing that you probably can't say to Contreras. Like, if you're Contreras, you don't really care what the team acquiring you is paying to get you. You're just, if you want a new situation, you get a new situation. It's up to the Cardinals to have to worry about that part. But the Cardinals are not just going to punt on Willson Contreras just to get rid of his contract, because I don't think it's bad money, dead money, the way that Buster Olney is described. Yes, the Cardinals are in a position right now where they're going to call it cash strapped, or they're going to call it they're going to be stringent with their spending. Whether they need to be or it's just a choice is not really the point of this conversation right now. We can debate that. We have debated that. And I think they could be spending more. They're choosing not to. It is what it is. We'll see how it plays out. But you can't look at what he's done offensively the last 2 years and tell me that this is a busted contract. The guy's making $18 million a year and producing better than Arenado did last year at a higher salary, better than Goldie did last year at a higher salary, doing it at a premium position behind the plate. Like, I'm not looking at this money, and the Cardinals aren't either, for Willson Contreras and saying, oh, it's a dead contract. No, he's making $18 million a year for the next few years to be an 826 and an 848 OPS that he's been the last 2 seasons. That's 123 OPS plus, 136 OPS plus. That's 36% above league average, 23% above league average. His numbers are great at the plate. He's done everything the Cardinals could have hoped for, and maybe even a little bit more offensively. When you look at his numbers, his OPS in 2020, the COVID year, 763. 2021, 778. 2022, 815. He's been above each of his last 3 seasons in Chicago in his first 2 years with the Cardinals. He's been better than those years offensively. He came to St. Louis and improved his numbers compared to his recent performance at the plate in his final 3 years with the Cubs. I do not agree with the assessment that the Cardinals are looking at this like it's a dead, oh my gosh, this albatross. No, honestly, other than the weirdness surrounding the narrative of what it's going to mean, and you kind of have to wonder, like, in the clubhouse, what's it do for Contreras? And look, I think he's a consummate pro. As much as he gets a bad rap for certain things, I think it's totally, totally off base. This guy tries and cares more than a lot of Major League Baseball players. I've seen it up close, man. I've seen it in person. I've seen it in front of his locker stall. I've seen it. So I just don't think that's a fair narrative that's going to be painted. The Cardinals are going to hate the narrative too, because they're going to look at this and say, man, we can't catch a break. Yeah, we effed up a little bit on the way we handled it in 2023 when he first got here, and Mo has since copped to that. He owned it. But now it's like we can't escape that narrative. Now that we're moving him to first base, people are going to forget everything that happened in between, which was last year. He put in work. He was a quality catcher behind the plate. But you know what? He did get hurt. It came at a cost. He got better at pitch framing, better at receiving. He moved closer to the plate. It's what we wanted him to do. That's what makes this like, oh, you got to be kidding me. If I'm Contreras, to put on a brave face publicly and say that this is what I want, and I'm happy to be a St. Louis Cardinal, the dude deserves your respect, because privately I wouldn't be surprised if it was, man, even if you don't even admit it to anybody, but it's just kind of like, man, this isn't really what I envisioned it being. But the dude doesn't complain. The dude just goes out there and puts his heart into it every single day of the year. So it's not what he envisioned. I'm sure it's not. But it sounds as though he's going to be a consummate professional about it. And from the Cardinals' perspective, when it comes to a value proposition, you're going to have as long as it doesn't impact his bat, it doesn't take his mind off a hit, which again, when he DHs, he's always been a very productive hitter. So I don't think this is going to cause him to change as a player offensively. You got a first baseman that can potentially outproduce what Goldie did last year. Like, I'm just going to give you the instant reaction from a baseball standpoint. Goldie had a sub 800 OPS last year. He had like a 716 or something OPS last season. It was a below league average player offensively. Goldie's going to depart, and you're going to have Willson Contreras take his spot at first. All right, we'll get to what happens behind the plate in a second, because they've obviously got to replace Contreras' production. But you're going to move Willson to first, and let's say he hits the same way he did the last couple of years. Had an 820 OPS and then 840. Let's say let's go on the lower end of that, 820 OPS. this coming year. And he's going to be able to play more games because he's not going to be behind the plate, which is a lot more rigorous. He's not going to have to deal with scouting reports. There's a case to be made that taking that off of his plate and allowing him to basically focus full time on being a hitter, which, yes, he will have to learn first base. He's played it before, but he'll have to put in time to improve at it. Would it shock anyone if he actually improved offensively? I think it's possible when you think about the way he's going to be divvying up his time and his focus on the game of baseball. But let's just say, for the sake of argument and to call it conservatively, 820 OPS for Contreras. Instead of 350 plate appearances, he has 550 because any day he's not playing first base, he's going to be able to DH for the most part. It's going to keep him healthier. It's going to keep him fresher. It's going to save his knees for the remainder of this contract. Again, I'm putting the spin on it of how the positives could play out for the Cardinals, but I honestly don't think it's all spin. And I think the emergence of Pages and Herrera contributes to this just being a reasonable way to fit this puzzle together if you're the Cardinals. Given everything, given the context of we're not spending to bring in a new first baseman, given the context of, Alec Burleson is going to maybe play some first base and he can obviously platoon. And by platoon, I don't necessarily mean that, Willson Contreras isn't going to be in the lineup against righties. No, but he can DH. And you could let, Herrera DH sometimes. What I would expect is, and it'll be interesting to see how they do it, against lefties, Herrera is probably someone you want to be in the lineup. You're going to want Contreras in there too. I think Herrera's going to catch. Contreras is going to play first base. Or you could also have all three of them in the lineup. It'll look a little bit strange, but you could do it. Because I guess you'd at least be able to have Contreras as a very viable emergency catcher, right? Even if he doesn't catch much, it's going to be, you're never going to have to go, they're burning an extra catcher. They've got an extra catcher on the bench. As long as the Cardinals are willing to be creative about this, I think this would be the way to do it. You don't have to have a fourth catcher if you're counting Willson, or a third catcher if you're not, because Willson is going to be the best emergency catcher in the history of Major League Baseball, right? Like, he's not going to catch, but he could in a pinch. So you could put all three of them in the lineup on the same day if you wanted to be willing to have Contreras still remember that he's caught for a decade in the big leagues. And you could put Pages behind the plate, Contreras at first, Herrera could DH, and that could be a viable lineup that they run at times against left-handed pitching. And then against right-handed pitching, one of the two true catchers, which is going to be Pages and Herrera, one of them will be catching. The other one won't be in the lineup. Alec Burleson, if he's going to play some first base, could be the first baseman on a day that Contreras DHs, or vice versa. You could have Contreras at first and Burleson DH, or somebody else can do it. It's going to allow the Cardinals to have a little bit more flexibility, I think, with the lineup. The only hurdle to get over is, it's embarrassing because they signed him to be the catcher. But I think I can recall a couple of years ago when the signing first happened, we were basically going, is Willson Contreras really going to be an everyday catcher 4 years into the contract, 5 years into the contract? And we all kind of said, probably not. We didn't know the winding road that was to come, but I think that wouldn't have shocked anybody necessarily. Is it a little earlier in the contract than we thought that they're going to incorporate more first base? And is it a little earlier in the contract than we thought that they're going to completely abandon him as a catcher, which, if it's unlikely that he'll catch much, that's basically what their plan is, according to the way DG reported it. Yeah, it's not exactly what I think we had envisioned. It's not what Contreras had envisioned either. But I would make a case that part of the reason it's happening is less about the weirdness of 2023 for Willson Contreras, and it's more about, honestly, everything that's going on now with the St. Louis Cardinals. It's the payroll. It's the emergence of two catchers that at the time you weren't confident in either of those guys being part of the future. Like, Herrera blew it in 2022. He had his chance to be the next Yachty, and he wasn't ready. And everybody progresses at their own pace, so I'm not blaming Herrera for that. But the Cardinals felt at the time they had to go out and get somebody like Contreras. Well, they had him, and they still have him, and he's their best hitter, honestly. So he's going to be replacing Goldschmidt at first base. This confirms what we already knew, that Goldie is not going to be back next year. But Contreras had better numbers than him offensively in 2024. Want to read it from Katie Wu. She's reporting on the same topic. This was her tweet. The Cardinals are moving Willson Contreras to a first base/DH role next year, John Mozeliak says. Both parties decided it would be best for his health and longevity of his career. Moz says it's unlikely Contreras will catch at all next year. Herrera, Pages are in line to split time, And Katie adds, in his various conversations with players under no trade clauses, Mo says Contreras was very clear about his desires to stay in St. Louis. It's exactly what I said it was going to be at the end of the season when we got that press conference and when Mo said, yeah, we might be trading guys. Contreras of the three, and look, this is not to say that Arenado and Sonny Gray definitively said, nope, get me out of here. I'm just reading Katie's tweet. That's what we know at this point. In his various conversations with players under no trade clauses, that's the three we're talking about. Mo says Contreras was very clear about his desires to stay in St. Louis. Maybe the other two were also wanting to stay, but not as emphatic as Willson. Maybe the other two didn't want to stay. We don't know. I'm not putting a definitive take on that. I'm just saying it's as I predicted. Contreras would be the one that I felt like could say, hey, he's got, longer contract than Sonny. Arenado's still around for a number of years. But Contreras felt to me like the one that would want to finish what he started. So not to say those other guys won't come out and say the same things, but my ranking had, I can't remember if I said Sonny most likely to go or Arenado, and then Contreras at the bottom of that list. Contreras is not being traded. Like, that's what we just found out. He's staying. Mo had those conversations. Contreras wants to be a part of this. Cardinals fans should rally around this dude. I'm telling you, everything I know about Willson Contreras makes me believe that Cardinals fans should love the guy. He is team first. He is willing to do whatever is necessary. And it's not to say that there aren't other players who embody that, but not many embody it the way that Willson Contreras does. Just being honest with you. Cardinals fans, let me know your thoughts on this. Obviously, kind of got more information as this little podcast went along because I had a limited window to record it, and I knew that we would probably get more as I went, and so it was almost like a live show in the way that I timed it out. But I'm very curious for y'all's thoughts. I think it's honestly a good news. It's good news because it means he's not being traded, and it means for those who feared that Ivan Herrera might get traded, the Cardinals might make the wrong choice. They're not doing that either. They're set at catcher with Pages and with Herrera, and keep in mind, Jimmy Crooks, our guy from Double-A that we talked a lot about in Down on the Farm this past season, probably going to be definitely going to be, he's going to go to Triple-A to start the season, it seems, because you're not going to have Pages or Herrera clogging up that spot in Memphis. So it's different than what everybody anticipated, but it sounds like Willson Contreras is on board. So I think Cardinals fans probably should be too. Again, this is going to be the type of move that the national narrative, it's there go the Cardinals again. They're ruining their players. Whereas I honestly, maybe I am naive. Maybe I am just believing everything they're telling me because I'm reading two tweets from the reporters, and basically the reporters are just sharing, those that are down there at the GM meetings are just sharing what Mozeliak has said about it. So they are reporting the company line. I'm inclined to think that the company line from Mo is a reasonable way to look at it. Could we find out at some point that Willson, maybe he isn't as thrilled about it as otherwise? Maybe. I don't know. But I believe 100% that he wants to be in St. Louis because that's just the kind of player he is, kind of person he is. He wants to finish out what he started. He was frustrated at the end of the season. He was trying to put, with whatever leverage he thought he had, put that out to the world, to the front office to say, hey, get us some help. We want to be great for these fans. And, unbeknownst to him, they're going in the complete opposite direction with payroll. But it just so happens that his role is actually one that can fit very nicely into making the 2025 roster make more sense. We'll spend more time in the days ahead talking about the fallout on the rest of the roster and where some of those puzzle pieces might fit in. How does this affect guys like Burleson? How does this maybe impact the rest of the outfield? Because you can see the dominoes begin to fall. Okay, if Burley has to play more outfield, does Donnie have to play more infield? If Donnie have to play more infield, does Nolan Gorman have to play more third base because Arenado's not on the team? You can kind of see the gears begin to spin. I'm up against it. I don't have more time right now, and we've already gone over 30 minutes, so I will save that. But let me know if you want to hear more about my thoughts on the fallout of this, because we finally have some of the wheels in motion for this Cardinals offseason. It's going to be fun to keep talking about it. You will not want to be anywhere else this offseason. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Follow B-Shape Daily on Spotify as well for the audio podcast. Appreciate you guys, as always, for listening. There will be more, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Shape Daily. Peace.